how do you plan for a 100-story skyscraper when the people meant to live in its shadow are, literally forced to measure their morning bread by the gram?
That is the exact question, isn't it?
It really is. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. I'm thrilled you could join us today. For this particular journey, we are opening up our own archives right here at Addis Fortune, which is Ethiopia's largest English weekly newspaper.
We've compiled a really fascinating stack of stories from our recent editions for you.
Exactly. And our mission today is to explore this profound, almost whiplash-inducing friction between a nation's towering economic ambitions and the very grounded daily realities in the street. We're going to examine how a country sketching out blueprints for vertical megacities is simultaneously struggling to price a basic loaf of bread.
Right, while also attempting to completely rewrite the financial rules of the African continent.
Yes.
It is a remarkable dichotomy to observe. When you read these Addis Fortune editions side by side, it stops being just a collection of news updates.
Yeah.
It becomes a masterclass in the complexities of a rapidly transforming society.
Wow, yeah.
We are looking at macro-level financial engineering
Yeah.
and micro-level survival economics happening in the exact same physical space. It paints a picture of a country that is essentially living in multiple economic timelines all at once.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting at the literal foundation of all this ambition, which is the physical space of the capital itself. So Addis Ababa is currently drafting a brand new 10-year master plan via a dedicated project office because the current plan from 2017 is expiring.
Yeah, and understand why drafting a new urban blueprint is such a highly charged endeavor? We have to look at the history of that 2017 document.
Right.
It wasn't just a boring zoning file. It became the flashpoint for some of the most significant political upheaval in the country's recent history.
Right, because it included that integrated development proposal.
Exactly. In bureaucratic terms, officials framed it as a necessary mechanism to link Addis Ababa's rapidly growing infrastructure with the surrounding zones in the Oromia regional state.
But the reporting shows that for many residents and activists and political groups, this was viewed as a covert boundary expansion.
Yeah, the fear was that integrating the infrastructure would effectively extend the capital's administrative reach deep into Oromia. From a practical standpoint, expanding city limits often means expropriating agricultural land.
Which obviously triggered deep anxieties about local farmers being dispossessed of their livelihoods, right? And the regional state losing its administrative autonomy.
Right, and the fallout from that was immense. Our reporting details how that mistrust spilled directly into the streets.
Starting around 2015, high school and university students began leading massive protests.
And that eventually evolved into a nationwide anti-government movement that stretched all the way to 2018. Thousands of people lost their lives in the protests and the security crackdowns that followed.
It was incredibly intense.
It was. Ultimately, the intense public pressure forced the EPRDF-led government to scrap the integrated portion of the project entirely. And that sustained pressure fundamentally weakened the administration, creating the political conditions that contributed to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed coming to power in 2018.
And that is a context hovering over the new planners today. The standalone master plan for Addis Ababa itself survived, and experts credit it with shaping the city's current physical form.
Yeah, the new commercial districts, the corridor development.
Right, exactly. But now, officials like Getachew Hale, the deputy head of the Planning and Development Bureau, are facing a monumental task. They have to figure out how to reconcile severe land scarcity with a mandate for vertical growth.
We are talking about theoretical allowances for 100-story buildings.
100-story buildings. It sounds like they're trying to remodel a massive house, but everyone living there is fiercely debating the floor plan because of a bitter argument they had during the last renovation.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, how do you mandate zoning for 100-story buildings when the literal ground floor is still a political third rail?
Well, that tension is precisely why veteran urban planning experts are sounding the alarm. And Tina Tesfaye, an architect who worked on previous iterations of the city plan, is warning that technical projections simply cannot be overridden by what he terms short-sighted political wishes.
Right.
Modern planning requires scientific projections. If you ignore environmental limits and infrastructural data in favor of ambitious government mandates, you risk putting unbearable stress on the entire urban system.
Because you can't just mandate a skyscraper if the underlying sewage, water, and power grids aren't designed to support that density.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just the hard infrastructure. Manalush Alamu, another veteran urban planner we featured, makes the compelling case that the core purpose of planning is to enable residents to live comfortably and be economically productive.
And comfort isn't merely about aesthetic parks. She points out that it's about proximity.
Right, if your workplace isn't close to your home, you lose hours of productivity every single day just trying to navigate transit.
So if the planning doesn't reflect the daily economic realities of the citizens, the blueprint is ultimately failing the people it's supposed to serve.
And when she talks about daily economic realities, she's really talking about the lived experience of scarcity.
Yeah.
The master planners are dealing with scarcity in terms of zoning grids and vertical air rights.
Yeah.
But for the ordinary residents of Addis Ababa, scarcity isn't a line on a map.
No, it is quite literally measured out in grams at the breakfast table. Which brings us down from the 100-story blueprints to the ground-level reality. For millions of people in the capital, the price of a morning loaf of bread is the ultimate measure of their household's financial survival.
From a macroeconomic perspective, bread is an absolute heavyweight in the inflation metrics.
Oh, massive.
Based on the data we track, bread and cereals account for 17.1% of the total consumer price index food basket. Because bread takes up such a massive chunk of the budget, even a slight shift in its price sends profound shockwaves through the broader economy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The official government statistics are broadcasting that headline inflation is cooling down to 11.7%.
Right.
But if you strip out the non-food items and look specifically at food inflation, it has actually climbed to 13.5% year over year. Are officials relying on a stabilized headline metric to declare victory, while citizens on the ground are literally measuring their nutritional survival gram by gram?
It's a huge disconnect.
Yeah.
That divergence between macroeconomic indicators and kitchen table economics is a classic symptom of a strained economy. Headline inflation might look better because certain non-food categories stabilize.
But a citizen cannot eat a stabilized housing metric.
Exactly. When the cost of basic caloric intake is rising faster than the overall economic indicators suggest, it creates a severe crisis of purchasing power. The personal stories in the reporting illustrate this perfectly.
The human element is striking. Take Helen McConnon, a neighborhood janitor earning $2,100 a month. She has a teenage son who prefers eating bread with every meal.
Oh, yeah.
With prices climbing so aggressively, she is spending $75 a day solely on bread. That single expense is wiping out her ability to buy any other groceries. She even noted that the physical loaves have become so small, she doubts a toddler could get full off of one.
It's just devastating.
And then there is Etsajanet Teklu, a public health nurse. On her salary, commercial bakery bread is no longer an everyday item for her daughters. It's become such a luxury that when a guest asked what treat to bring the girls, they didn't ask for candy, they asked for bread.
Wow. When a basic foundational staple transforms into a luxury gift, you have to examine the structural mechanics of the supply chain.
Yeah.
The bakeries themselves are caught in a brutal economic vice.
We really are.
You look at Patina Bakery, where the price of a standard loaf jumped from 10 to 15 burr in a single month, while the weight shrank to just 75 or 80 grams. Or Enbut Bakery, which is teetering on the edge of closure.
Right. And they aren't doing this simply to maximize profit margins. They are fighting for survival. Their operational costs are spiraling out of control.
Yeah. The coverage points to massive recent fuel hikes, which drove transport and logistics costs up by over 200%.
On top of that, there is the minimum alternative tax. That specific tax mechanism is absolutely punishing because it targets their total gross sales rather than their net profit.
So even if a bakery is operating at a massive loss because flour is so expensive, they still owe a hefty tax bill just for keeping the doors open.
Exactly. They are forced into an impossible choice. Raise prices and alienate low-income customers, or utilize shrinkflation and risk regulatory penalties.
That structural view is exactly why the analysis from Tika Ghebreyesus, the former state minister of trade and industry, is so crucial. He argues that viewing this merely as a problem of consumer inflation misses the root cause. This is a symptom of failing logistics infrastructure and fragmented supply chains. Every single friction point, the degraded roads, the security checkpoints, the middlemen, it all adds a margin.
So by the time that wheat becomes flour and reaches the bakery, the embedded transport costs are astronomical.
Exactly. And Tika warns that the instinct to just pump cash into the system, like raising public sector wages, is dangerous.
Because if you inject more money into a supply-constrained market without fixing the logistics, all you do is bid up the prices further.
Yeah, it triggers a wage price spiral that completely destroys whatever purchasing power households have left.
So, to avoid that wage price spiral and actually fix the broken logistics networks, the country desperately needs massive capital investment. You need billions to build better roads and stabilize supply chains.
Yes.
And to source that level of capital domestically, the government is turning to the public by launching a brand new digital stock exchange.
That pivot is fascinating. Moving from the price of a 70-gram loaf of bread to the launch of the Ethiopian Securities Exchange, or ESX, represents the leap from daily survival mechanics to the architecture of future finance.
Yeah.
But the rollout is violently clashing with the country's institutional readiness.
Oh, completely. Our sources show a young capital market that is essentially drowning in its own bureaucracy.
Right.
Out of 71 registration statements submitted, 66 of them were filed right at the deadline.
Which pushed the regulatory body into absolute overdrive just to process the paperwork. That highlights a severe lack of audit readiness among domestic firms.
Right.
But the larger issue is on the investor side. The initial public offering for Ethio Telecom, the massive state-owned enterprise, was expected to draw a tidal wave of retail investors. But they only managed to sell 3% of the shares offered to the wider public.
3%. And the secondary trading is incredibly erratic. We reported that in 1 week in May, trading volume hit 54 million birr. The very next week, it plummeted to just 15.8 million birr. Furthermore, almost 90% of all shares traded involved just a single company, a wash bank. It's essentially a one-stock market at this point.
The underlying problem is the narrow base of formal retail participation. Adulam Hailu points to data showing that roughly 97% of all bank accounts in the country hold balances of less than 100,000 birr.
Wow.
So Adulam argues that for the stock exchange to actually function, it has to capture what he calls money in the cushion.
Money in the cushion. I love that phrasing.
Right. It's the massive informal liquidity pool where citizens keep their savings in physical cash or livestock to bypass the formal banking system.
But capturing that informal wealth requires a completely different approach. Jumechu Berhanu, a capital market expert, points out a fatal flaw in the current strategy. He notes that the investment banks are trapped in a high-end communication bubble.
Yeah, relying on English language messaging and dense financial jargon.
Right. It's like throwing a massive financial party to fund your country's future, but writing the invitations in a language the locals don't use. I mean, how can regulators expect money in the cushion to migrate onto an electronic ledger if everyday citizens don't know the mechanics of a bid-ask spread?
It is a profound disconnect in financial literacy. Regulators are working incredibly hard to implement strict compliance standards to protect investors. But if the broader public doesn't grasp the basic mechanics of risk-bearing equity, those regulatory protections are moot.
Because no one is walking through the door.
Exactly. The state is trying to build institutional trust in a digital framework for a populace that has learned to fundamentally trust physical cash under the mattress.
Which puts the government in a bind. Since everyday citizens are slow to open their wallets, the state is pivoting aggressively to court massive strategic investors by offering them a completely unprecedented level of protection.
The shift in strategy here is a major departure from historical precedent. The Council of Ministers recently approved a regulation that arms strategic investors with legally binding enforceable safety nets.
So what does this all mean for the architecture of the economy?
It means the Ministry of Finance now holds the authority to guarantee compensation if state action disrupts a strategic project or strips an investor of their expected returns. They're essentially converting political and operational risks into contingent fiscal obligations for the federal taxpayer.
Let me push back on that logic for a second. If the government is guaranteeing the demand and legally promising to cover the financial losses if things go south, aren't we just stripping the fundamental risk out of a risky investment? It feels very much like socializing the risk while entirely privatizing the reward.
That is the exact critique many developmental economists are raising. But the government's counter-argument is based on the sheer scale of the capital required. International lenders simply will not release billions of dollars for infrastructure without sovereign guarantees. To sweeten the deal further, the government is also utilizing off-taker arrangements,
where a state entity signs a long-term binding contract promising to purchase specific quantities of a good from the investor at a pre-agreed price.
Yes, often calculated in hard currency. Look at Ethiopian Investment Holdings, or EIH. They have taken a 40% equity stake in the Dangote Group's new fertilizer project in the Somali regional state.
A $2.5 billion facility.
Exactly. Under this new legal framework, the government could provide structured offtake arrangements, essentially guaranteeing that the state will purchase the fertilizer output. This eliminates market demand risk for an investor like Aliko Dangote.
It is easy to see why a billionaire investor would jump at that kind of security, but surely this creates friction elsewhere in the market.
Absolutely. Expert Shier Shamolo warns that while these massive incentives might attract foreign direct investment, they come with severe diplomatic and economic risks.
Because Ethiopia is integrating into the African Continental Free Trade Area and negotiating accession to the World Trade Organization.
Right. Both of those bodies operate heavily on principles of non-discriminatory treatment. If you hand out legally binding sovereign guarantees to a select few politically connected giants, while smaller domestic businesses are left exposed to inflation, you risk violating international trade principles.
You cannot rig the regulatory game without severe downstream consequences. Which makes our final story today all the more striking.
Yeah.
We have spent this deep dive analyzing an economy paralyzed by logistics bottlenecks, an infant stock market struggling to communicate with its own citizens, and a government handing out sovereign guarantees. And yet, operating right in the middle of this, Ethiopia possesses a state-backed entity that has mastered global logistics so thoroughly that other nations are quite literally begging them for help.
The contrast is extraordinary. You're referring to Ethiopian Airlines Group.
Yeah.
In an era where legacy African carriers are continuously collapsing or requiring massive state bailouts, Ethiopian Airlines is reporting revenues of $7.6 billion, operating a modern fleet of over 145 aircraft. It is the undisputed bellwether of continental aviation.
And now the government of Namibia has formally approached them, asking for technical and operational assistance to help them resurrect a national airline.
Yeah, Namibia's previous flag carrier, Air Namibia, had to be entirely liquidated in 2021 after absorbing something to the tune of $467 million in state bailouts.
And Ethiopian Airlines CEO, Ms. Finteso, confirmed they're actively conducting feasibility studies for the Namibian request. Rather than just flying planes, they utilize strategic alliances and minority equity stakes to expand their hub-and-spoke network.
There are even discussions about creating a broader regional arrangement that could link Namibia with Botswana to feed passenger traffic directly into Addis Ababa.
But aviation expert Jonathan Menkir offers a crucial piece of advice for Ethiopian Airlines. He advises them to tread very carefully, start with advisory work before committing hard equity.
And he provided a quote that perfectly synthesizes everything we've explored today.
Yeah, he warned, political ambitions should not run ahead of commercial realities.
That truly is the definitive through line for all of these stories. The secret to Ethiopian Airlines' global dominance has always been its fierce protection of its technical independence from domestic political interference.
Right.
It forces itself to operate strictly on commercial realities. That is the exact same discipline that urban planner Antina Tesfaye was begging for regarding the new 100-story master plan and what capital market experts are demanding for the digital stock exchange.
It is wild to me that a country struggling to transport wheat a few hundred kilometers for a loaf of bread is simultaneously running one of the most efficient airlines in the world.
When you step back and view these narratives collectively, you witness a country stretching across multiple timelines. You have the hyper-modern ambition of vertical megacities, digital equity ledgers, and a globally dominant aviation strategy.
Running directly parallel to a grounded daily timeline where a 70-gram loaf of bread functions as a luxury item and the public fundamentally relies on keeping their life savings stuffed inside a cushion.
The profound friction between those two realities is where the actual future of the nation is being forged.
That is incredibly well said. And it leaves you, our listener, with a profound question to consider. If a society rushes to build the financial architecture of tomorrow, the digital stock exchanges and international off-taker agreements before it fully secures the basic physical supply chains of today, who ultimately inherits the future of that city? Is it the strategic multinational investors armed with sovereign guarantees? Or is it the everyday citizens still trying to navigate the price of breakfast? Is it a complex reality without an easy answer?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the pages of Addis Fortune. We deeply appreciate you spending your time with us today. Keep learning, stay curious, and we will catch you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye, and thank you for listening.